welcome to episode 331 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here
Andrew
with...
Crawford.
Michael O'Malley.
In today's episode, we'll talk about movies that we saw this week, and in part 2, we will conclude our World Animation series with 2018, I guess, somewhat 2020's The Wolf House. We're really dipping into multiple years with these last two entries, but it's fine. Whatever. Who cares?
Well, I think the Chinese film that we watched was also released in multiple years, so it's just
that's the magic of animation. It's just years don't matter.
Timeless.
That's how we're gonna take. We're going out of 2020 with a series of movies where the years don't matter. It's just all jumbled. All right, well, let's jump into. Actually, real quick, we have a new review up on Cinematary. We're going to talk about this movie a little bit in part 1, but Logan Kinney writing about Mank, the new David Fincher film, on Cinematary.com. We also got Spree, another 2020 release, and Hillbilly Elegy, which, if you've not read the Hillbilly Elegy review, I still highly recommend it. I thought it was really good.
It is the only review that has a thumbnail that is just a meme, because one of our writers made a meme that was so good I could not pass it up.
I'm going to create a meme that is so good I couldn't pass it up.
That's correct.
All right, well, let's go ahead and jump into movies that we saw this week. Michael, I'm going to kick it off with you because I guess we can start it with Mank since I teased it already.
Let's do it.
Let's start with...
Give the people what they want. Give them the Mank.
Let's talk about some Mank. Let's Mank it out.
Yeah. So, Zach, I know you talked about this movie a little bit a couple weeks ago, so I'll just give like a kind of brief reminder to dedicated listeners who may not remember from a couple weeks ago, but
I don't think I ever said the plot.
Oh, did you not? Okay, so
it's about Mank. What more do you need?
Yeah.
It's about Mank, maybe like the most unpleasant nickname I've ever heard, which is the nickname for
that's true
for Herman Mankiewicz, the like famous screenwriter who screenwrote many films, but significant to this one is the contested screenwriter of Citizen Kane. Like, he and Orson Welles both have credit, and there's kind of like a historian battle over who actually wrote it. But according to this movie, he was the sole author. And this is a movie about him writing Citizen Kane, and that's kind of the frame device. And the rest of the movie is him like flashing back Citizen Kane style to like all the moments in his life that kind of led up to where he is at the beginning of the movie, which is that he's like a washed out alcoholic with a broken leg and who's like holed up in a desert somewhere in a cabin being forced to write this screenplay not with Orson Welles, but for Orson Welles.
Wait, can I ask a question?
Yes.
I know part of this movie involves Mank giving an Oscar speech.
That's the very end,
Is the movie constructed around Mank needing to think about his entire life before he goes out on stage and gives his Oscar speech?
It's no. It is about Mank needs to think about the 10 years leading up to him writing the Citizen Kane screenplay. But there is an element of like we start in basically near the very end of the movie, and then he thinks about part of his life. But it's not like a cradle to grave biopic.
Right.
I'm not even 100% sure it's a Mank biopic to begin with. Like, it is really about two things, like plot-wise. Like, one is the writing of Citizen Kane, and there's like a good chunk of the movie that's dedicated to him in the cabin, holed away. He's kind of a debilitated alcoholic at this point, and so like he's also going through a little bit of withdrawal / scheming to get more alcohol, which the movie doesn't. I don't know. Like, the movie seems to have a mixed relationship with the dude's alcoholism. Like, it seems like it's his kryptonite and his superpower or something. I don't know. He needs to be drunk to write Citizen Kane is basically it. But then the other part of the movie is like at the point that he's writing Citizen Kane, he's kind of like been cast out of the studio system because, as we learn in the other part of the movie that he keeps flashing back to, he basically had a falling out with Louis B. Mayer of like MGM, of course, and this falling out had to do with him just kind of not behaving himself as a studio cog. Like he didn't want to support the political candidates that the studio wanted him to, which in this case would be not. Mankiewicz wants to support Upton Sinclair, the socialist guy running for governor of California, whereas all the Hollywood executives are going after are banking on the Republican guy whose name escapes me at this moment. And
let's sidebar real quick to say that Upton Sinclair is played by Bill Nye the Science
yeah,
Guy.
and that was great. I was a little bit disappointed because I had heard a lot of jokes that he's basically being Bernie Sanders in this, and I did not get that vibe at all. Like, I mean, obviously the talking points are similar in that, like, we got to redistribute wealth and, like, don't let corporations and et cetera.
He's a socialist.
Right. Yeah, he's a socialist. So, like, in that respect, he's similar to Bernie Sanders. But I was looking for, like, mannerisms and stuff, and that didn't come across at all. So
you see Bill Nye's Bernie impression?
Yeah, I've yet to see that. And he's barely on screen. Like, you see him at a rally, and that's basically it.
But I've heard some people say, I guess Nathan specifically, if I'm remembering correctly, say that it's kind of a veiled, like, anti-Bernie movie.
Oh,
is that a thing?
I wouldn't say that at all.
Okay.
I think that the politics of this movie don't quite fit with the Citizen Kane context. For those people who don't know, like, Citizen Kane is kind of a thinly veiled film about, like, William Randolph Hearst and his relationship with his wife, Marion Davies. And that is tied up in the Upton Sinclair stuff because Hearst kind of throws his weight behind the Republican guy as well. So there's all sorts of stuff like that. And there's a lot of Amanda Seyfried plays Marion Davies, and she's quite good at that. And the movie is, about that relationship too. But as far as, like, the mayoral plot goes, or not mayoral, the gubernatorial plot goes, I don't know. See, okay, so here's where we get, like, some of the problems with the movie. Like, I don't know that plot necessarily squares with what we see, like, with the writing of Citizen Kane. Like, the movie kind of does this thing where it, like, seeds all the moments in his life that, like, get put into Citizen Kane. And so, like, I get that. But as far as thematically goes, like, honestly, like, what it felt like to me is that, like, the film was kind of depicting Hollywood as this, like, hopelessly regressive institution, and, like, the people who don't support Upton Sinclair are, like, huge sellouts. So I don't think it's anti-Bernie at all, like, to the extent that it's about Bernie Sanders anyway. I do think the politics are, like, confused. Like, it's not clear because a lot of things in this movie aren't clear because it's, like, just this long. It's like 2.5 hours, and it has so much stuff going on in it that I don't think it all matches up. But to be honest, like, I found the stuff with the governor election to be kind of captivating. And, like, there's all this sort of stuff about, like, how, like, the, like, Hollywood, this is, like, a pseudo fabricated incident, but it reflects, like, real things that happened. There's, like, they get people to make, like, fake documentary, like, newsreels that are anti Upton Sinclair. And one of the guys who directs that fake newsreel is actually, like, an Upton Sinclair supporter who just is kind of, like, coerced into doing it because he really wants to, like, be a director in Hollywood. And, like, there's like all sorts of stuff like that that's kind of, like, really interesting about, like, it feels like an anti-nostalgia movie, and, like, in some ways it's a very nostalgic movie because there's all these, like, allusions to, like, old Hollywood stuff, and that's, like, kind of fun if you're interested in that. And the movie is filmed in black and white, and it tries to look like halfway tries, like, unsuccessfully, I think, it tries to look like an old Hollywood movie because it's, like, digital photography, and it doesn't look like it's widescreen. So I don't know, the illusion's unconvincing, but it's, like, in some ways trying to be nostalgic, but in other ways it's really trying to show, like, just how craven and, like, soul destroying, like, the Hollywood studio system was, which, like, honestly, like, tracks with, like, kind of the general, like, David Fincher ethos of, like, misanthropy. So I don't know, like, I just don't think it fits together. Like, I got through this movie and I enjoyed most of the moments individually, but I think it doesn't quite hang together. So I know that Zach, you were mostly negative on it, and I'm sounding pretty negative. I enjoyed myself watching this, but I think that like upon like if you, it's one of those movies where you can kind of have enjoy the surface pleasures and like think about like the cool like little bits in the movie and the things that could have made the movie better, and that's kind of fun. But like as far as like some sort of grand like thesis or you know when you try to look at the movie as an entire work, it kind of like you know falls apart a little bit. Zach, I
Well,
go
I
ahead.
think no, I think that like all the stuff that you're describing like is the reason why I don't super like it, because it's just there's so much stuff that it's trying to cover, and you're just like what, and you're at the end of the day you're just like what is this movie about? You know, it's you have kind of, you know, Gary Oldman hamming up this performance as Herman Mankiewicz, and just I mean there's like large swaths of the movie where he's just kind of you know, walking around like a peacock around old Hollywood. It's one, so that you can kind of let him do that, and two, so that you can, you know, run into Joseph von
Yeah,
Sternberg
that was random.
and Louis B. Mayer. Yeah, and Louis B. Mayer and like just random icons of old Hollywood. But it's yeah, it's only kind of vaguely an old Hollywood movie. So, and then you get into like the Citizen Kane stuff, and you have like this just strange, well, not really strange. It's kind of built with into a lot of you know, writing before, whether it's the Pauline Kael essay or just kind of people's feelings toward Orson Welles. But you just have like this whole caked in animosity toward Orson Welles and the creative process toward Citizen Kane.
Okay, can I interrupt real quick to say that like the guy playing Orson Welles is
He's not very
terrible.
good, no.
Like I think otherwise this is like a really well acted movie, and like that's like a big part of why this movie is like fun to watch, is that like most of the actors are like fun to watch, but the guy playing Orson Welles is just abjectly terrible. Both at like mimicking Orson Welles, but also
But
just
maybe that's the like maybe just judging with how David Fincher seems to feel about Orson Welles, maybe that's on purpose. You know, I don't know.
I mean
Um,
maybe. It's a wild thing to make your movie worse because you hate Orson Welles.
but yeah, so then and then you have the whole political sphere that you're describing, and you know, I don't, and I'm not with Nathan necessarily, where it's like this thinly veiled anti-Bernie movie. It seems to me more, and this I think kind of goes in line with comments made by David Fincher, like leading up to the release of this, where it's just kind of it feels, it you know, it feels more like, hey, I'm gonna make a weird statement about current culture that doesn't really land or feel necessary, but I'm going to make this statement regardless, but you know, try to parallel it with history so that I can justify this statement by going, you know, we're looking at history and showing that we're repeating ourselves. And I'm like, no, I don't understand what any of this has to do with anything. I don't know, it was just kind of a frustrating movie to me because it just felt like it was very much a vanity project, and I guess I just didn't go along with the vanity project.
I think I would have been more into it as a vanity project if it had just picked one thing and stuck with it. Like, because the structure of it is meant to evoke Citizen Kane, which is like, you know, looking at little different parts of Kane's life and like doing this really broad historical survey. I think that's to this movie's detriment like a ton. Um, I, for example, like the political subplot, I think could have been its own movie and an interesting movie if it had just delved into that and like done it with like the eye to historical detail that it treats like the Hollywood studios or whatever. Like I don't know, like it's an interesting plot to me about like that like Hollywood like manufactures consent like in politics. Like that's an interesting thing, and the
It's
movie
just
is only
half
like
baked.
25% about that. Like it, and also like it could potentially be interesting, like a movie about this washed up screenwriter who like is paired with this young like prodigy that he resents because he's an outsider and stuff like that. You know, the writing of Citizen Kane, and like that's an interesting plot, but like the movie like is constantly cross cutting that with all these other stuff too. And so if it had just like picked that to be about, like that could have been interesting. And like I said, I enjoyed the act of watching the movie, but like as far as like evaluating this movie and thinking, it's just one of those movies where it's so evident like how it could have been better, and like the biggest thing to say how it could have been better is just stick to a single plot.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where I'm kind of at the end of the day. Is I like David Fincher, I like his stuff, but like with this in this case, if he would have if he would have picked one lane with this, like then it like maybe it could have made sense, but it just felt like he, I get it. He's writing it from a old script from his dad. I'm sure there's some like cats in the cradle shit going on. I don't know what his relationship was like, but it's just maybe you shouldn't have made this movie. That's my thing. I don't know. Mank now on Netflix, and Logan's review is on cinematary.com.
I will say, like, so I've read Logan's review, and like he makes a case that's much more positive than we are. So if you'd like to,
that's true.
if you'd like to see like someone who has managed to pull out like a coherent thesis from this movie, like that's the review.
Logan sees the messiness as the point, I think. So if you are willing to extend that courtesy to the movie, that's the essay for you.
There you go. Well, let's go to a movie that you're much more high on, Michael, and that is Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Oh yeah, so I watched this a few days ago, and I know Andrew watched it not too long ago either. So I guess we can both talk about it. I'll just go ahead for those people who like don't know. Rocky Horror Picture Show is a 1975 movie based on a stage musical from a couple years earlier that stars Susan Sarandon, Barry Bostwick, and most notably Tim Curry. And it's about Susan Sarandon and Barry Bostwick's characters, who are named Brad and Janet, they're going to get married, and they're driving, and I don't remember why they're driving, honestly. It's not important. They're driving, and their car breaks down, so they're like, and there's a storm, so they're forced to go into this mysterious castle that they say at the beginning is the Frankenstein castle, but the guy who runs the castle, his name is Frank Infurter.
Yes.
Not that it matters, but like I'm not sure what to call the castle.
They're just trying to make sure the illusion is very clear.
Yeah. What it turns out is that like this is a castle that is full of like people who are just like having a big ass like party, and Tim Curry is the sweet transvestite from transsexual Transylvania who is like presiding over the whole thing, who to cap off the night has like used his Frankenstein or Frankenfurter powers to create a man for himself, because he is like bisexual and just needs like this perfect specimen of a man. And so like there's this like Frankenstein-esque plot to it as well, but like none of this is important. The important thing is that it's a movie that is like a musical, like it's like a glam rock, like David Bowie, Ziggy Stardust style like musical that is like all about like taking these square like Brad and Janet, who are like these buttoned up people who are gonna get married and whatever, and just like throwing every like queer like iconography at them in order to just like disintegrate their heterosexuality and just make them just throw them into this melange of like just raw sexual energy that has no regard for gender or like boundary or anything like
Monogamy.
that. It like honest.
One thought I had about the whole like Brad and Janet setup is that it's kind of like the good version of Beetlejuice.
I like
how
Beetlejuice too. I'm
Beetlejuice
not gonna be
opens
party
with
to
like
Beetlejuice slander, but
okay, sure. But the same basic idea of like we have this young newlywed couple who basically dies at the beginning of the movie, dies to the world anyways, and kind of gets like taken into this strange world of, I guess in this movie, like quote unquote deviants, and in that movie like the world of the dead or whatever, who have a lot of similar like flamboyant energy about them.
Yeah, but this movie is just like off the wall. Like, so I watched it because it's of course most notorious for like kind of midnight movie screenings in which people go and like there's all these audience participation things and people like pantomime the film on stage and like stuff. So it's most famous for that. And so I was a little skeptical about watching it on my own for a long time, even though I'd been interested in it. But I finally just like got the DVD from the library and watched it during the day by myself, which is like not a great plan for watching like a film that's famous for like live events. But like I was completely blown away by just how freaking like fun this movie is, like from front to back. Like it is very funny. It's very like the music is great. The performances, especially Tim Curry as this like central like uh like he's an alien. Like I guess that's not exactly a spoiler, but like he's an alien like play acting.
I was surprised.
Oh.
I didn't know that was the twist of this movie.
Okay. Well, I had heard some of the songs before. Like I kind of knew some of this stuff already, so sorry for the spoilers. But but like, there's just everybody is just like doing this like vamping like camp performance that like is just like completely over the top and completely fun. Like it's like one of those like winky like haha, we know that we're being silly and kind of like in poor taste.
There's like a narrator character too who like pauses the film at times and comments on the thing that you're seeing. So there's a great deal of distance between you and what's happening
right,
on
but
screen.
it's like not like a lot of movies that do that can be kind of irritating, but like this isn't irritating at all. It just feels like this like anarchic fun that's
everybody's kind of in on the joke,
right,
together,
including
I
us,
guess.
the audience. Like there's no contempt in it, and they kind of like clearly love the things that they're making fun of as well. Like the opening scene, I guess the opening credits are like just these lips on this black background singing a song about like science fiction films, and it's like all the science fiction films that they make allusions to in the movie, and it's clearly like an affectionate like ribbing, while also like kind of breaking down like the kind of traditional like gender or like nuclear family kind of things that those movies maybe sometimes upheld. I thought it was super fun. Also, Meatloaf shows up, which I wasn't ready for.
Oh my gosh.
It's great.
Meatloaf's scene is perhaps the most ridiculous part of this very ridiculous movie, where, they're having this long dance number about this Frankenstein hunk that Dr. Frankenfurter has created to have sex with. And in the middle of like his long introduction, Meatloaf just drives his motorcycle through a wall. Like you've not seen Meatloaf in the movie up to this point, and he just like bursts through a wall like the fucking Kool-Aid Man and starts singing a long song, and then he dies at the end of the song, and then everybody just goes right back to doing what they were doing before. It's
so
incredible.
one like personal anecdote about this is I watched this and I like keep a blog that like I put all my Letterboxd reviews on, and my parents read my blog, and my dad called me the other day like unprompted because he had read my blog, and he's like, I saw that you watched Rocky Horror Picture Show, and like I loved that movie in college, and I went to so many like late shows where and that was really surprising to me because my dad is very like he's kind of like a Brad a little bit, like a kind of nerdy like dude, which is like fine, like that's not like a negative thing, but I was very surprised that my dad was enthusiastic about Rocky Horror Picture Show enough to call me on the telephone about my review that he read. But anyway, one of the things he says about audience participation is that like there's a point later in the movie where Meatloaf is like referenced again, and the audience is supposed to shout at that point, "Meatloaf again? No!" And like there's a lot of like my dad was breaking down all the audience stuff, and it's all kind of like fun, corny stuff like that. And it sounds fun. But anyway, I just wanted to share that little bit that my dad shared about Meatloaf.
One final thing about this movie, I watched it with Jesse, and it was like maybe a month or so after the whole cultural discourse about WAP happened. And Jesse was asking like, what if like the conservative media sphere that exists today existed in 1975 when Rocky Horror Picture Show came out? Like, what would they say about this? Because this is like, I don't know if you could say as like sexually provocative as WAP. It's definitely in the same ballpark, in the same conversation. But we're acting like, their popular art has never been like super sexually transgressive before, when obviously things like this, almost 50 years ago now, were. It's just I was shocked by just how like sexually bodacious this movie was.
I will say like it's obviously not the same thing, but like conservatives hated rock and roll in like the 50s, 60s,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
70s
yeah.
because of what they considered it being like sexually deviant or whatever. And so, I mean, I guess that they probably just would have hated this and this, just seen this as another iteration of like, just the rock like perverting the children or whatever. I guess that would be my guess.
But the movie is obviously lampooning that mindset too, like any sort of mindset that would keep you in a more traditional way of doing things, or sitting in a sense of judgment towards people who are a little bit more transgressive. So yeah,
Yeah, so super fun. I 100% recommend this, even though we're living through a pandemic and there's obviously, well, I hope there's no live shows, and it holds up even without the like community element
yeah,
of it.
for sure.
Yeah, it's actually one that is a blind spot for me. I've never seen Rocky Horror Picture. It's mainly because I don't want to be a part of the live show thing, so I'm gonna be like you and just watch it like at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday.
You would like the movie, Zach. I'm sure you would.
All right. I'm sure I would. I'm just gonna watch it at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday and not in a live setting.
Hello, Cinematary listeners. This is Andrew Swafford with an important message during this break in the show. Cinematary would like you to know that we do not want your money, and we don't want to place ads in the show at this time. That's not why we do this. We do it because we enjoy each other's company and because we want to bring you our pure, unadulterated opinions on the world of cinema. However, there are a few things you can do to help out the show that we would greatly appreciate. Firstly, leave us a review on iTunes, preferably a positive one, because the algorithm gods tell us that reviews increase our podcast's exposure. Secondly, send us a tweet at Cinematary, or better yet, send an email to cinematary@yahoo.com so that we can hear from you guys for a change. Maybe you think I'm an idiot for not liking Singing in the Rain, or maybe you have a suggestion of a movie that you really want to hear our opinion on. Regardless, let us know your thoughts, and we'll read them out and respond to them on future episodes of Cinematary. Finally, please share the show with friends and members of your family who you think would enjoy listening to and participating in our film discussions we bring to you guys every week. So to recap, review, send us your thoughts through Twitter and email, and share with your friends and family. We would truly appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Now let's get back to the show.
Afuera hay un lobo. ¿Hay algún chileno aquí? Hola, vengo de la colonia.
And we're back with part 2 of episode 331 of Cinematary. In this part, we'll conclude our world animation series with 2018's The Wolf House, which is directed by Cristobal Leon and Joaquin Cochina. The story is about a young woman who takes refuge in a strange house in the woods after escaping from a German colony in southern Chile, which is what Google told me, but hell if I know that's what it was about, to be honest. The director spent 5 years creating this 73-minute film in art institutions such as the Casa Mayad in Mexico City, the Buenos Aires Museum of Modern Art, the Museo de Arte Contemporáneo in Santiago, and Media Arts Bienal of Chile in Santiago de Chile, among other locations. And it's my understanding that they also worked with artists within these museums, and then it premiered at Art Basel in Miami. So it's kind of it's very influenced by the modern art museum scene, which I think we can get into just in terms of how it's kind of constructed. In 2018, the directors told the New York Times that they did this in part because they knew the filmmaking process would be lengthy. They needed 12 shots for each second of footage, so they didn't want to create it all in solitude. Quote, the process of the filmmaking had a sculptural quality and a material quality. We wanted to be able to show that to the public as well. The film is based on a true story that begins in a German colony reminiscent of a traditional Bavarian settlement known as Colonia Dignidad, or Dignity Colony, which a group of German immigrants set up in southern Chile after World War II. In 1961, a former Nazi corporal, Paul Schaefer, who had had been charged with sexually abusing boys at a German orphanage, became the colony's leader. During his nearly 40-year rule, he turned it into a horror camp where children were separated from their families and sexually abused, and adults were drugged and made to work in slave-like conditions under constant surveillance. The Chilean military dictator Pinochet was not only aware of the colony and its leader, but also used it as a torture camp for dissidents and political detainees from 1973 onward. Leon on the story said
Funny how those Nazis are always doing that.
they always make their way in. The director Leon on the story, quote, "The film is really inspired by some cases of people trying to escape the colony who were arrested by police and brought back. This very eccentric cult or religious sect became very powerful in Pinochet's time. The reason why they became so successful is still sort of a mystery. It's a national trauma that we need to talk about. It's still very current because we have a right-wing government in Chile today." In 2020, IndieWire said, "The Wolf House reminds us that fairy tales are powerful because once upon a time we were all young enough to believe them." Variety said perhaps comparing it to a David Lynch film can come close to characterizing the experience. And The Hollywood Reporter said, "The deeply uncanny pick makes for an unsettling viewing experience, a creative tour de force whose endless fascinating visuals are deliberately seductive and repellent in equal measure." So in that case, let's talk a little bit about The Wolf House. So I watched this. I had not seen it before, and I watched this at like 10:30 at night on a laptop, which is important.
Very brave.
Which is
very brave.
Yeah, which is very important because this is the sound design in this movie is haunting, and so like having like headphones.
That was something that didn't come across to me at all. I guess because I wasn't listening to it with headphones.
Yeah, so
on,
if you watch this movie,
now that you mention
if you watch this movie with headphones, it becomes a whole different experience because like it has all of these just ethereally creepy noise. Like you have these like stomach gurgling noises that take over. You have just like stuff you can kind of
Are the noises meant to be mirroring something you're seeing on screen, or are they just kind of non sequitur or awful noises?
No, I think it's supposed to be, see, my understanding was kind of like the wolf character is like is almost this like it's like he's just kind of outside of the realm of what we're watching on screen, and so you just kind of
right, because you never see the wolf.
You never see him.
There are talks about the wolf being outside,
but I think
so that's what you're hearing.
But yeah, I think that's what you're hearing because you hear like this stomach gurgling noises. You hear like claws on this wooden floor. Like you can just hear stuff. It sounds like something's in your room as well. It was terrifying. So high recommend. It was pretty fun. It was terrifying, but it was pretty fun.
How was sleeping directly after? How did that
slept
go?
like a baby. I had zero issues sleeping last night, which is strange.
Okay,
Andrew, what was your experience like with this?
Well, I watched it in the middle of the day because I was not quite so brave as you. I mentioned at the end of the episode last week that this is a movie that's been on my radar all this year. That I've been telling myself I need to watch the movie. It's one of the 2020 movies that looks the most interesting to me. But every time I like pull up the page to rent it, I see the picture and I'm just like, I'm not right now. I can't take it. I'm not ready. Because just looking at individual stills of this thing, it is, I don't know, like you can't imagine it being, just the still images are so horrifying that like you can't imagine what terror is going to be evoked in you when you start to see it in motion. I was a lot less scared by it than I thought I would be. Maybe because I wasn't listening with headphones, maybe because I wasn't watching it at night. But also the movie is kind of like on that like extremely nightmare fuel wavelength at every single moment that it kind of levels out for me. Like it stops being shocking because you're looking at something horrifying and grotesque like literally every second of the film. And so my brain just kind of started to normalize it after a couple of minutes. And I was just kind of trying to track the oddity of the things that I was seeing move on screen. And honestly, I got a little sleepy by the end of the movie. Like there is kind of a hypnotic quality that this has to it, especially because the story is so loose and abstract and symbolic, especially from an outsider's perspective who doesn't know like the full political resonances of all the things that are being illustrated here. It just kind of becomes this weird phantasmagoria. So at this point, I don't really know how I feel about it. I'm curious to get more into it with you guys. Michael, how was it for you? Yeah, go ahead.
Before we get into Michael's thoughts, I do want to say I would highly recommend going back and listening or watching it with like headphones on, like with like a nice pair of headphones on, because you have to kind of get like that sensory experience to it, because I was the same way. Like you kind of get lulled into the story, but then what keeps you on edge is just the sound, because like a lot of these characters are like represented in like these kind of paper mache like things, and the way that like they kind of crunch into existence is terrifying. It like just all of those little nondescript odd sounds that kind of come from nowhere are what kind of haunt you, because they sound almost like they're coming from in the room with you. Like you can't really tell, you can't pinpoint where they're coming from. You just see this strange paper mache pig creature on the ground.
Also lose your sense of space too. Like it seems like the whole movie was shot inside one house, right? But that the space of that house is very nebulous and malleable. Because the animation is often done on the wall of one room. But on that wall, you're seeing characters walk through multiple hallways and multiple rooms. And like there's even a scene where a character opens a book and the camera zooms in on the book, and inside the book is another room, and we're kind of like inside that space for a little while. And it's kind of unclear, at least to my memory, like when you leave that like literary space and go back into the wolf house proper. So the idea of like there being a wolf outside the walls of this house, like just outside at all times, is kind of a strange prospect, because you don't really know how close to the outside you are at any given moment.
The reality of the film is super malleable, and spatially it's hard to tell what's going on, which like for me, like I also got drowsy in this movie, but I also like was pretty unsettled as well. And I think maybe some of that has to do with like you're never quite sure like what the boundaries of what you're looking at are, because like you said, like you can be looking at a flat surface that suddenly gets drawn on and becomes like representative of a much larger space that you didn't realize you were supposed to be looking at the moment. And like that was like, I don't know, like it was an unsettling movie, but I was also like just transfixed by the animation, which is like nothing I've ever seen before, because this particular style is like, like you guys mentioned, like going back and forth between these like 3D paper mache objects when the characters kind of break out of the panels, I guess, into the 3D space, and then also flat animation. And the way that the flat animation is done is that there are not individual frames like you would see in a traditional animated film, where each one is a separate drawing or a separate object. You get where like a character is painted on a wall, and in order for that character to move to the right, they repaint the character on top of the existing character, and then like paint another color over like where the character previously was. And so you're seeing like the animation kind of superimposed over itself as like the environment eats the other, like the previous versions of like the previous frames. Like it's really strange and interesting. And I was like just like completely transfixed by it, because it's on the one hand like almost meta, because you see like the way that the animation, like there's no attempt to hide the artifice of like, here are the things that we did to create this animation, which is like super interesting, but also it makes these characters more uncanny as well, and strange. Like, and they'll do like really interesting effects on this too. Like you'll have like one of the paper mache characters will be like just moving along, and then like paint or a color will just be splashed onto the paper mache character itself, and the character will switch from being a 3D object to the character will be painted onto the paper mache and will like slide off of the paper mache object onto a wall or something. Like like,
but the object is still sitting there.
The object's still sitting there. It's just painted over with like a kind of neutral color, and it's just like an amazingly malleable format that they chose to like do the animation in that I've like literally never seen this technique before, and I just thought it was super incredibly cool to look at while also yielding some just like really unpleasant stuff. Like also characters will like melt at times. Like this is like a thing that happens at multiple points is like a drawing will be there and then it will melt, and sometimes it will melt onto like a 3D object and become a 3D object. Other times it'll just melt into like a puddle and get painted over, and that was always like uncomfortable when I saw that. Like,
or whenever a 3D object is constructed, it's not like it just pops into existence. You see it be constructed one piece at a time, and other moments in which you see 3D objects kind of morphing into other 3D objects. Like there's one scene where the protagonist Maria and the two pig characters are laying on a sofa together, and it's like the pigs are they meld with the sofa and like then kind of come back to life as pigs, and then they all kind of like turn into the sofa. It's very a strange experience to watch, as is basically every frame of this movie.
And throughout the film there's like, to the extent that there is a plot, the plot is that like this woman like has these two pigs and she like trains them to be like people, and so like kind of like Animal Farm,
and then they become people.
Yeah, kind of like Animal Farm style, they slowly turn into like people, and that in itself is just kind of horrifying, not just because it's weird to see like half animal half people things, but also because of the animation style where you see the paper mache being like put on. It's like the characters' bodies get like deconstructed and like body horror-ish, and like I do think that the David Lynch comparison is apt if you've watched David Lynch's animation specifically. Like this does feel like kind of like the rabbits, or like some of his early animation that's like really grotesque stop motion and stuff. Like it feels like the same relationship to like the human body, in the sense of like it is a thing to like pull apart and like stretch and just kind of like look at in like what you can do with animation to peel back like whatever like layers you have on top, and it's super like just, it's not like a fun movie, and especially because also, like, we've not talked about, like, there's a framing device at the very beginning of the movie in which this is presented as...
it's presented as a documentary.
It's presented as a propaganda film, right, by the Chilean government to prove that the like, cult, like, concentration camp, whatever it is actually a good thing. And, like, so, like, this is supposed to be, like, a cautionary tale for why you shouldn't leave the compound.
So, yeah, the idea is that she gets exiled from the colony and goes and lives in the woods.
No, she runs away, right? I thought she runs away and tries.
Well, isn't she gets punished because she lets a bunch of sheep loose or pigs loose? I forget. Isn't the punishment that she has to be gone for like 10 days or 100 days?
Right.
Or something
Yeah, she
gets
isolated outside of.
And that's what it seems to me, is like she found this space in the woods, and there happened to be some pigs out there. Just maybe the same pigs that she let loose. I don't know. And she just like lives with them and goes crazy, or gets hunted by a wolf, or starts to lose her grip on reality and try to turn pigs into people. It's a little unclear to me, but I guess that's the idea, right? That living in the colony, concentration camp, whatever you want to call it, is better than living on your own in the wilderness.
Well, I was gonna say, I think that you have to, at least I was viewing it like under the lens of like she's processing this like through trauma, and so like you have like, because of that, like that's why the kind of fairy tale conceit of the story works, because it's it's just the mode that fairy tales work in to kind of make sense of these like really like this feels much more in tune with like pure grim fairy tales than any other fairy tales that you're seeing like from mass pop culture at the moment. And so, it's just to me, like, all of this like kind of tearing down of like self and like the pig creatures and all, like, and just like the walls around her, it's like this kind of like just this process of trauma. And like that's like to your point, that like that's what was terrifying, is like there would be moments where like the woman's face would just kind of break apart and decompose and then like be built back up in a different way, and then like black ooze would come out of the eyeballs and stuff.
I'm scrubbing through the movie right now, and I'm currently paused on the moment where like just blackness starts pouring out of every orifice of their face.
And so like that's kind of the mode that I stopped trying to really understand like what plot beats we're following, and more just go, this woman is trying to process her trauma, and like this is just how it's being manifested.
If I can go back to like the fairy tale element that you mentioned, because like this is like kind of like fable like or fairy tale like, Andrew, I know, and I'm gonna forget like what it was that you were reading, but you were telling me not too long ago that you were reading either a book or an essay, I can't remember, about how like a lot of fairy tales that we're familiar with were meant to reinforce like certain cultural values or reinforce conformity. And I think that that's interesting in the context of this being like, the frame is that this is a propaganda film meant to instill conformity in this like repressive regime. And I'm also interested in the way that like obviously the filmmakers don't buy into that. Like the propaganda thesis is not the thesis of the film, and like there's an element of like this movie becomes such a grotesque thing that it like sees to whatever extent that like we as viewers could understand like what the like propaganda messages in a film that's abstract like this, it kind of like the horror of it like just it like imbues everything, so that like even at the end of the film in which she's like quote unquote rescued, like that in itself feels horrifying too, just because the entire film feels horrifying. And so like the propaganda ceases to work because the horror that it depicts is so all encompassing that it like takes over like the message itself. And I don't know, that was kind of a disconnected thought, but it reminded me of what you had mentioned that you had read.
The book, by the way, I also cited in my review of Gretel and Hansel earlier this year. That book is called Fairy Tales and the Art of Subversion by Jack Zipes, fairy tale scholar and folklorist, I guess. And specifically, he talks about how the initial waves of the fairy tales that we now know, after they were kind of collected from the oral tradition and written down by people in like salons in France, were kind of constructed specifically to like uphold like bourgeois values and to normalize like the lifestyles and the moral systems of the very rich, and you can kind of see that transplanted here onto the idea of like, well, this is a fairy tale that's told by this obviously brutal regime in order to make themselves appear preferable to the world outside. Her getting rescued at the end is something that I'm a little bit unclear on. Maybe it was just that I was kind of fading at this point in the movie, but there is a narrator voice that pops in and out of the movie at times. And it's often like talking directly to Maria, like saying her name over and over in a really creepy way. And the movie ends with this narrator kind of like addressing the audience, right? I'm a little fuzzy on this, but does anybody remember what the like final note is?
It's like
here.
Well, I mean, the final note is like, don't we get a right before the credits roll? Don't we return really quickly to the music of the like the propaganda frame?
The music is probably there, and then we're back to like this kind of charcoal black flat animation too, like going through the woods. The last line is a question directed to the audience. Do you want me to take care of you? Question mark.
Yeah. So I guess it like what I took away from that, I didn't remember that being the last line, but like I guess what I took away from it is like where it ends is like he talks to the audience and it's like gosh, we've seen what happened to Maria when she disobeyed. Like, you know, sure would be terrible if that happened to you, kind of thing. Like, isn't that's what I remember? Although I don't remember the specifics, like, because the imagery is so abstract at that point. Is that kind of like, isn't that kind of what happens?
Yeah, I guess so. And you're like looking at a gate at the end too. That's the last image. So I guess that's the gate of the colony that we're returning to. Yeah. Zach, after having done a lot of the research on the history here, do you have any thoughts about like the the historical allegory being done with like Pinochet's regime and all that?
Well, it seems to be, kind of to the whole point about the propaganda. I think it's just it's trying to kind of connect to you had, and that's why I kind of talked about like it being attached more to trauma, because it's like the whole story that we're in outside of the kind of propaganda conceit at the that kind of bookends it, is very much like kind of trying to process this very terrible event that like took place. And like I remember in the interview that these guys had in the New York Times, they make mention that I think there was a live action movie that like tried to dig into like the colony and like what was happening there and all the tragedy there, but I don't think it did much, because it kind of, nobody I don't know to say like this is a better watch than sitting there watching like children being sexually abused and people being tortured and stuff, because this is also like very harrowing, and as we've kind of described, like a very difficult watch to take in. But it's I think the interesting thing about it is that I compare, like the movies that we've watched so far, especially in this series, have been at least, we talked, Michael, about this with the Monkey King, but like that has like this kind of language back to to early Disney movies. And then we talked about with Norstein, it kind of has like this much more straightforward like kind of stop motion effect to it. And the Son of the White Mare, while being unlike most things that you've seen, at least has kind of like this base foundation in animation that it's pulling from. And this one is interesting because it's like its style and what it's pulling from is like these art installations and stuff that you're.
It doesn't seem to be pulling from cinema at all.
No, it's not.
I will say, the one animator that this reminds me of is the work of Jan Svankmajer. Is that how you say his name?
Yes. Who I've seen nothing by. We talked about including his movie Alice in this series, but decided against it.
Yeah, Alice isn't the one I'm specifically thinking of here, because it's not conventional stop motion in the sense of the imagery, but like the technique is kind of conventional stop motion. I'm thinking of, he has a film called Dimensions of Dialogue, which is like a short, which is like clay stop motion, and that has like a kind of similar approach to like how it does like the approach to like bodies, in which like there are these two heads that are like just kind of being manipulated the whole time, and like this kind of, the metaphor is like this is how people interact via language.
Yeah, I'm looking at a picture of it right now, and it is giving me similar heebie-jeebies to the still photos of Wolf House. So yeah, that seems to track.
It's much more playful and fun than this one, but it's got the same sort of like kind of morphing like ambivalence to like a recognizable human shapes and stuff. But anyway, that's the only like precedent that I would name in cinema. Otherwise, like 100%, it's like out of galleries and stuff.
Yeah, but I think that's what makes it kind of interesting, and what has kind of drawn me into it is that like it's approaching this less in like a cinematic fashion and more like the way like I was describing it at the top, with all of these kind of sensory effects to it. Like it feels like it's something that you're walking through, that like you're inhabiting, rather than the other ones, which feel like much more traditional visual media that's just kind of in front of you and presenting something to you. Like this one, this felt like much more interactive, and I think that's like rather than. I think to bring the point home, like rather than having like this live action version of the kind of, you know, biopic-y version of this story, this one kind of immerses you in this very interactive fairy tale that it may not seem clear necessarily at first, like what it's trying to tell you, but like it's more just kind of enveloping you in this very traumatic, torturous world that you know, is happening, and like that just is kind of a different effect than you're probably used to with most movies.
I will say that getting a little bit more context about the historical stuff running underneath this movie makes it a little bit more comprehensible to me, to the point where I would almost recommend people go read about that stuff and then watch the movie. Or if they're listening to this podcast, we haven't really spoiled it for you, right? Like the experience is what it is. You just have to have it for yourself. Like even if you have not seen this movie, maybe after listening to the podcast would be a good time to go watch it, and like you can kind of tap into the like traumatized feelings of abject terror that the film is tapping into. With all of that historical stuff kind of in the back of your mind. Because not knowing about any of that, I felt like I was mostly looking at nonsense. Seems like a harsh, mean word. I don't mean it that way, but you know, images that did not compute to me.
No, I mean that's fair, because it does just toss. There's just so much stuff happening, and you're trying to like process it all, and like we've described, like the people are like decomposing in front of you. The wall is moving. Faces are appearing on the wall. Faces are moving on the wall. Like there are pig people with 4 legs crawling in the room, like spiders. Like it's just, if we described Son of the White Mare last week as unlike anything we've seen, like Wolf House is like a different version of anything like we've ever seen.
Yeah.
Like it's
Son of the White Mare is like the intensely pleasurable version of that, where it's like just completely throwing all conventions to the wind in order to create just like this colorful and lively experience that is meant to kind of appeal to your lizard brain, and this is doing the opposite. Like it is only going for disgust and abject horror. Right.
I will say too, like with how abstract this film is, like I know we haven't talked a ton about like the different like media that like these films are made out of. Like we did a little bit with Norstein, but it's interesting to me that like, at least as far as I know, stop motion has a much more robust history of the avant-garde than drawn animation. It's not that there's not an avant-garde in drawn animation, but like when I think of like avant-garde animated films, like there's a lot of stop motion that comes to mind, and this film definitely has like one foot in that tradition as well. What are some of them? Well, I mean, Dimensions of Dialogue is one. If we think of, oh gosh darn it, yeah, Jody Mack. Thank you. That's exactly who I was thinking of. There's that. There's, I mean, a lot of Czech animation and like Eastern European animation is like built around stop motion rather than drawn stuff. And so there's a pretty robust history of like the avant-garde, specifically out of that I'm thinking of as well. Go ahead.
We've mostly talked about this movie being animated with paint and paper mache, but it's also worth mentioning that this house is messy and just full of stuff, and they animate over just about everything. Like one of the first things that happens in the film is you're looking at what is essentially a blank wall with stuff painted onto it. And then some jackets just kind of like stop motion themselves into the frame. Like they kind of like just are almost on a conveyor belt on the wall. And then they like hang themselves up on the wall, and they stay there for pretty much the rest of the movie. and the artists just like paint over them. And the things that are moving across the wall also have to move across these jackets that are just like now painted onto the wall. And like the same goes for, you know, lots and lots of picture frames and furniture and just like junk that's left on the floor. Even just the house in and of itself is kind of scary, just because of how disheveled in kind of like an incomprehensible way it is. But the fact that they also like animate over all of this stuff is really impressive and scary in a very specific way.
And I will say, to the extent to which that there is any sense of like fun or play in this movie, it's that, like, the fact that like there's almost like the film sets like challenges for itself, like by making these rules where like 2D animation can occur on a 3D object and the 3D objects kind of get painted over. Like, it is not like fun in the...
And we can treat 2D spaces like 3D spaces too.
Right.
Like, there's also a moment where the pigs are walking like on the wall in paint, but then like they start to animate the pigs on the floor too, as if the pigs were just walking in the middle of the room. And they're kind of like, the way that you're looking at them, the illustration of the pig is kind of like on both surfaces at once to give the impression of it being a 3D object.
It is like, yeah, so like there's moments like that where it's like there is like a kind of, there is a little bit of a sense of humor to like the technique, in the sense of like it's just kind of like transparently like, oh, look what we can do. This is kind of funny that these jackets are here the whole movie, and like, oh, a character's walking along the wall, so I guess they're gonna have to walk over the jackets. Like, and I don't. It doesn't come across as like funny in the movie, but like if you kind of think about it, like the fact that someone sat down and did that is kind of funny.
One of the objects that is in the house for one scene of the movie is a Christmas tree. So obviously, Wolf House is a Christmas movie. Watch it with your family.
That's right.
It's also the scene where there are pig people and on four legs crawling across the room.
This is when
so I would
Is that
not
the one where they
recommend it.
bend over and you can see them from the back, and there's like a little like paper mache button?
Yes.
Yeah, that
Yes.
is like burned in.
That's an image that I will now forever
Yes.
know of. So thank you, Wolf House. Any final thoughts on it before we wrap up? I do want to say that, like, I kind of, to echo what you all were just saying, like, I think that, I don't know if we've done a good job of like selling this to people. It seems like we're just more like we're traumatized,
Yes.
and it's terrifying. But it is a fascinating, like, I think especially, but I feel like if you're probably getting this out of most of the series. But if you have like an interest in animation, like, it is a fascinating animated film, because like I said, like, it is, because it's so indebted to like art installations, the way that like you're describing how stuff is just like taking over other objects, like, it's so fascinatingly constructed that if anything on that level, it's incredibly interesting to watch, like, just because stuff is constantly
How long
happening.
did you say it took them to make the movie?
It took them 5 years.
5 years. See, one thing that I was thinking about is like the emotional toll it would take to just like be working on this stuff day in and day out. So like actually be in that house and be constructing these objects and painting these images on the wall. But now to know that that was their reality for 5 years. That's like, there's the anecdote about Jack Nance, the lead actor in Eraserhead, David Lynch like making him wear his hair like that for 5 years. Like that, but with so much more added nightmare fuel.
Yeah, I really liked it. I know last week, Andrew, you alluded to like wondering if this would make your top 10 of the year, and it might make mine. I have not tallied my list yet, so I don't know like what's in the vying, but like this is such a striking singular movie, and I love animation. I love animation that looks different and like nothing I've seen before, and this is definitely that. I'll have to think about how it compares to some other movies, but like this is definitely, like, if I think about notable movies I've seen like that are new, this is up there.
Yes, it is certainly notable. It is one of the most unique movies I've seen this year. I don't know if it'll make my top because I don't know if I ever want to watch it again. But it is certainly an experience.
That's what a way to put it. I don't know if it'll make my top because I don't think I ever want to touch it ever again. But it was something.
I might watch it again if someone asks me to.
And everybody's clamoring at your door to please, Michael, watch Wolf House with me.
Yeah, we should. Yeah, email me, hit me up on my blog, whatever. Like, I'm there for like the whatever. When this is on Netflix or something, we could do that Netflix party with the Wolf House.
That'll be your that'll be like a summer project when you're like, hey, what do you guys want me to watch? And there's just like 20 people who say Wolf House again.
There's a this we can end maybe on this note. Maybe there's a person I follow on Letterboxd who every month rewatches the David Lynch short "What Did Jack Do?"
What? Why?
And like, no, and each write up is based on just a minute of the film. So I think he's going minute by, like, he's rewatching the film, but every time just writing about something that happened that he noticed in like minute 8.
Wait, who is this? Can I follow them?
I can't. I have to go look. It's one of those things I've not paid attention to too carefully because he posts a lot of other things. It's not exclusively what he is. I don't remember his name off the top of my head, but every time it occurs, I get a little chuckle out of it. But you could do that with the Wolf House.
You certainly
minute
could.
45.
For the next 60 months of your life.
What kind of changed person would I emerge as from that project?
I mean, this is kind of the way to imagine what it would be like to work in this film for 5 years, right? Can you imagine watching this movie every day for 5 years and what toll that would take on your psyche? Like that, with the added experience of like actually being there for hours and hours and hours.
Well, and the fact that that's actually part of their national history. I mean, none of us, I don't think, are Chileans. Yeah. So that's
right.
like.
So I also have to think about like your country's history with Nazism and child torture and stuff. That sounds like an experience.
Sure.
Yeah, we luckily we live in America, so we can shift our thoughts to other places.
Yeah, there's nothing.
Yeah, we don't have
troubling about American history at all.
Or child abuse or any of those things, so we're good.
Merry Christmas. Well, that'll wrap up this episode of Cinematary. And it wrapped up in some way. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/cinematary, on Twitter and Instagram at handle at cinematary, and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/cinematary, where we have all the movies that we talked about in this episode. Oh, you bastard. As I'm trying to open up our Patreon at the same time as I just kind of tread water in this. I'm going to get to it. I might just edit this out. I'll edit it out. I'll just figure out a way to get around. All right, thank you to our patrons: Cam, Chad Newsom, Christina Daughtry, Harry Eskin, Joe Jordan, Maggie, Ron Hayes, the kittiest of kittens, Titus Arthur, Tyler Chandler, and Whitney Rio Ross. Thank you so much for your patronage. Next week we'll be continuing we won't be continuing. We'll be concluding the year.
We're done.
We'll be done with 2020. We're gonna do our best of the year podcast.
You know what? I have almost no predictions for what's going to be on that list. I think I know what's going to be number 1. I have no idea what 10 through 9 are going to.
Wolf House number 2
for us.
Yeah.
Wolf House number 2.
I've been if you've been reading like critics list, it's been really interesting because there's so little consensus. There's like 30 films that are all kind of floating around these lists, but there's not like a consensus like, all the critics rank this one the highest or whatever. It's really fascinating.
I think there is a consensus around Cinematary, but
yeah.
Again, I don't know what else is going to pop up there.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting one. So check it out, guys. Until next week, thank you guys for listening. We'll see you then.